dialogue. And Mr. Jarrett, you represented private sector, Jamaican private sector there. Give us a little bit on that and what happened, what came out of that dialogue.
Firstly, Minister Tufton invited me to chair that private sector dialogue, which was historic. It was the very first time that such a dialogue has been attached to the ministerial. And we were quite pleased that you had some 97 persons participating in that dialogue, including persons from at least 23 countries. The Jamaican turnout was pretty good, with some 60 plus persons, 64 actually persons coming to discuss the issues that impact agriculture. If you remember, part of this theme of the conference was also looking at building capacity in rural parishes. So we're talking about bringing investment to agriculture, but at the same time, looking at the ways in which we can improve and build on capacity in the rural parishes. As you know, if the farming sector grows, we could end up with services being delivered within the community. So within that context, the private sector in its final declaration made reference to the fact that it appreciated and is committed to agriculture as an important pillar to economic development.
Mr. Jai, you talk about marketing, but one of the key things to be done early is the marketing of the agricultural opportunities to the private sector itself. In other words, the private sector needs to be cognizant of the kinds of opportunities which exist in agriculture. Do you see signs of this consciousness?
Well, it was interesting to note that the private sector in the dialogue made reference to the fact that agriculture should be taught in schools.
The private sector itself was asking for this.
That, because what was recognized was that there's a tendency in our region to get as far away from agriculture as you can. And the first thing we need to do is to get the young minds engaged to think about agriculture. So we wanted it taught within the curricula at all levels. The second issue was that we recognized at the meeting and the conversations around the meeting that there are many opportunities in agriculture that people are just not aware of. And one of the things that we had proposed in our declaration to the ministers was that there be some sort of a database established where people can begin to see what are those opportunities. But in the final ministerial declaration, one of the things that was agreed to was that there was going to be a process of dialogue and interaction with all the stakeholders, including the private sector, to ensure that the opportunities that exist, the needs of the sector are recognized. And if we're talking, as we said, about agriculture and the related capacity building in rural parishes, we see the tremendous opportunity. And I just wanted to, and the public to understand the importance of building rural parishes. One might have a distribution company in Kingston and might not understand the implications of a farm in Frome. But if that farm in Frome should go, then that shipment that leaves Marcus Garvey Drive to Frome in Westmoreland will no longer happen if we allow for the rural communities to decline, if we allow for agriculture to go away.
I want to come up, Minister, I want to talk about what we'll be doing locally to strengthen public-private sector partnerships. We're looking at a recently concluded hemispheric meeting of Ministers of Agriculture at the Ritz-Carlton. We have with us the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries, the Honourable Christopher Tufton, as well as Mr. Earl Jarrett, General Manager of the Jamaica National Building Society, but also the person who speaks on trade for the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica. We take a break, but we'll be right back.
Stop! Don't turn a blind eye to child abuse, child neglect, and child labor. If you know or even suspect child abuse, call the Children's Registry. Together, we can make a difference.
Big things are happening in agriculture. Welcome back to Issues and Answers. We have with us the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries, the Honourable Christopher Tufton, and Mr. Earl Jarrett, General Manager of Jamaica National Building Society, but spokesperson on trade for the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica. And we're talking about a highly successful conference of hemispheric Ministers of Agriculture, which concluded last week. And as I said at the break, Minister, I'm interested in finding out what we are going to be doing locally. How are we going to continue the public-private sector dialogue on agriculture in Jamaica?
Well, we have done a number of things already. We need to strengthen those. Firstly, we have restructured the ministry. And in that restructuring, we have included a fairly strong component that is linked directly to the private sector. We have launched, for example, or established Agro Invest Corporation, which is a new entity, which has a board of governors that is drawn from the private sector, practicing private sector practitioners who are developing a strategic plan to package and to market agricultural investments to the private sector.
I see. Minister, the issue of financing is always a bugbear. People in agriculture talk about the reluctance of the financial institutions to give priority to agriculture, that people mouth these things at luncheons and dinners, but very little is done.
The financial institutions obviously have to protect their depositors' investments, and it's not their money, it's depositors' money.
But are they too conservative?
Well, I've always maintained that they need to think out of the box, and they need to apply a sort of developmental mode to the general principle of trying to get a returns on their investments. And what we have been doing is developing a number of programs in recognition of the risk profile of agro investments and the Jamaican farmer, because there are segments within the farming group that are more riskier than others. And what we have tried to do is to tailor specific programs to minimize that risk profile and to try to lock the financial institutions into supporting these very specific programs. We have a program that we intend to launch in another couple of weeks, and Earl's institution is a part of that, as well as several others, which again looks at the value chain from primary production straight through to market, and attempts to look at each level of the value chain to minimize the risk that would traditionally be associated with farming and agricultural activity. And we'll speak more specifically about that. But there's no doubt, I agree with you, that we need to do more. And we need to encourage as much as possible an understanding on the part of the private sector, including the financial institutions, to come on board and to work with us based on what can be done as
And Earl, do you see this happening? Do you see stirrings of this?
You know, coming out to the dialogue, well, in terms of stirring of it, we are at the table having those conversations. And if you recall, even from our own institution, last year we established what we call a Jamaica National House at Denby. And we established a loan program, and we've been working with the ministry to improve and to provide a better one to ensure that the farmers receive the funding necessary.
And can't we get multilateral assistance on that, Minister?
Well, we're actually doing that.
We're
actually doing that.
Yes.
We have a program we're working with coming out of those recent hurricanes and storms with the IDB and the World Bank. I was in Washington recently, and we have signed off on this parametric insurance model. The first study has been completed and financed through the IDB. We're now into phase 2, which is a pilot project that we'll be doing in Portland and St. Elizabeth. And another study is being done currently by the World Bank, looking at the regulatory adjustments, the framework that will be necessary in order to implement this scheme.
A lot is happening. Minister, congratulations to you for a highly successful conference. You've done Jamaica proud again, and both of you look good together. It's good to see the private and public sector working together in this field of agriculture. Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries, Honourable Christopher Tufton, and the General Manager of the Jamaica National Building Society, as well as the spokesperson on trade for the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, Earl Jarrett. We thank you so much for your company on Issues and Answers. Next week we'll be back. Until then, Ian Bowen wishing you a pleasant evening.
Before we close the pages, think on this. Failing to plan is planning to fail. Do remember to send us your comments to Jamaica Magazine at jis.gov.jm. You can also watch this program at www.jis.gov.jm. I'm Samantha Allen. Take care.
This has been a production of the Jamaica Information Service, the voice of Jamaica.